We must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
Take your own advice.
What happens? I tell you what happens. Blam!
I have a window that looks directly at the World Trade Center, and I saw...
No delusion!
Shit's getting way too complicated for me.
Welcome to The Antidote. This is Greg McCarran.
And this is Jeremy Rothkushel.
All right, it is Tuesday, March 26th, 2024, and we're going to continue with our spring outlook of things to look forward to coming up. And, Jeremy, it's funny that spring officially launched 4 days ago, and this series was inspired by the unseasonably warm weather here in the Midwestern United States. And now that it's officially spring, the weather is just very messy. It's blowing snow and it's cold and kind of miserable out. So it's just kind of funny how weather and I guess Mother Nature works in that regard. But
well, isn't that what they say? March in like a lamb, out like a lion. Yeah.
Yes, that is true. That is the saying. And also with the arrival of spring now on 3/22, we've had the spring has arrived with some significant events on a geopolitical foreign policy scale. And on the first day of spring, March 22nd, we had a massive attack at it's called the Crocus Theater in Moscow. As of the weekend, there have been over 130 officially dead. The number is over 130, and this is we've seen the response to this has been there's been an effort to blame ISIS. That was the official American media type of narrative, and then there's also the effort to pin this on a combination of Ukrainians and Western elements, and I know that's where a lot of people have gone in that direction. But in the 4 days since this has happened, Jeremy, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this, and then also on something that just happened today in Baltimore at the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, where a disaster that we're now beginning to get more and more details about in that regard too. So one definitively major geopolitical event that could have serious ramifications in Russia, and then this event that we really, it's not as serious in terms of death toll, but there may be something with this as it relates to some diplomatic geopolitical elements. But I know you have some thoughts on what has taken place.
Yes, and remember 3/22, the first official day of the full spring season. It's also obviously there is the club, the code for the Skull and Bones 3/22, and we have seen massive terrorism on this date before throughout aspects of history. And there's a lot of difficulty in terms of assessing exactly who did what and why in terms of the Crocus. I think they call it the Crocus City Hall, but it's really a theater. It's a privately owned theater. It's owned by the Agalarovs, who are actually fairly crucial players in the whole Trump-Russia timeline. It's the location of where they hosted the Miss Universe pageant in 2013, which is a key moment if you think about the multi-decade long Trump-Russia actual investigation that goes back through the 90s, 80s, even into the 70s, questions around even the familial connections of Trump's first wife, Ivana Trump, in terms of potential Soviet intelligence tie-ins to the then current Czech Republic government, or Czechoslovakia, I guess at that point. And then as you move toward the present, you have this 2013 episode at this same exact establishment where Trump is once again on the ground. And that time, I think he was flown there by key Kansas, remember QAnon, trust Kansas, key Kansas operative Phil Ruffin, who I think supplied the plane for Trump to go there. And the Agalovs seemed to be involved in the infamous first Trump Tower meeting, the Trump-Russia meeting in Trump Tower in the early summer of 2016. People often like to leave out the second big Trump Tower meeting that was later on at the end of the summer, which was the Middle East Trump Tower meeting that included, at the very least, emissaries in relationship to people like operatives like Eric Prince, emissaries of the Netanyahu security establishment in terms of Joel Zamel. That's Wikistrat. Involved with what was the other? Do you remember the name of the other Israeli intelligence company that Zamel was?
Were we thinking of Psy Group?
Psy Group, yes, PSY Group, Psy Group, and then also emissaries of the Saudi and Emirati governments at the highest levels in terms of that second Trump Tower meeting. So there is a whole 11-9 component to, at the very least, the resonance of this terrorist attack on the Crocus City
The
Hall
grand
theater.
bargain, as Seth Abramson refers to it as.
Yes, and remember, I mean, as we get to the other, even more current incident, that there is a lot of work to downplay the possibility of a potential cyber terrorist incident, really, or if we were to think about it in terms of who recently made an Israeli announcement on behalf of the Prime Minister, Ron Dermer, the current head of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, declining Netanyahu's scheduled DC visit, especially after the attacks on Netanyahu by the Biden quote-unquote regime and the quote-unquote capo, high-powered, protector of Israel Jew in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and then the Biden administration's allowing a ceasefire resolution to go through in the UN. And then you have Ron Dermer. Remember Dermer sitting behind Netanyahu when Netanyahu comes in the fall of 2002 to be the voice of the alleged Israeli government to push really hard, almost in a assaultive, like sort of terrorist threats kind of way, the U.S. Congress to invade Iraq, which eventually does happen the next spring, early in the spring again. Remember, we're sort of now dealing with the 21st anniversary of that exact time frame. And Dermer now is at the head of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, is at the table at most every single substantial U.S. diplomatic meeting with the Israelis post the Simchat Torah, what I call treason terror operation, or October 7th, or Al-Aqsa flood, or however people wanted to consider it. And as the ratcheting up of the assault on humanity and with genocidal intent and the mass destruction of people and culture and buildings and really the long-term national genocide intent of the Zionist project from before its origins in a state that we're seeing now, you will see, what's his name again?
We're talking about Dermer.
Dermer. I wanted to
Ron
call him
Dermer.
Shermer for some reason.
Ron Dermer.
Ron Dermer.
Mike Shermer's of the skeptic, quote unquote, variety.
Yes. And remember, there's this whole Dermer Miami connection. Then there's the question of the Lansky Syndicate, which we might then return to in terms of other things that are going on right now and other considerations that we've been looking into in terms of a bi-coastal Lansky Syndicate in relationship to Hoover Compromise, how that plays into organized crime and control in many ways in terms of sports, teams, gambling, communications, and then escalated up to the highest level of the domestic police agency in the United States in terms of a compromised Hoover. But it's Dermer who then announces that Netanyahu is not coming to D.C. And the timing that I see is Dermer says no. And remember, Ministry of Strategic Affairs in Israel is the one both leading the way in terms of the, what from an American perspective, I would say is a seditious assault on the First Amendment in terms of a combination of the anti-boycott, divestment, sanction laws. Like, is Dermer going to step in to speak against the U.S. Treasury Office of Foreign Asset Control sanctioning the Israeli military intelligence commander of the Special Technology Unit 81 that sits between Unit 8200 and Sayeret Matkal Special Forces on September 11th? Is he going to speak against that or no? They're going to focus on continuing to try to roll out their seditious state-level laws that are used to try to not necessarily quite criminalize, but basically in a civil way discriminate against. From a state level perspective, it could be seen as criminalizing speech that is related to anti-Israel or pro-boycott, divestment, sanctions, and these kinds of laws continue to be rolled out. Now, there's an increase of not only of the anti-boycott, divestment, sanction laws, but now there's an increase in terms of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, the new anti-Semitism rolled out by suspected Soviet capo police agent, maybe even deep intelligence mole, and very obviously Russian organized crime associated once Minister Natan Sharansky, also key voice for articulating the terror wars and especially the Iraq War, then passed on to our current czar of anti-Semitism, the Deborah Lipstadt, who has long for decades been sponsored by key Epstein patron Les Wexner, part of the mega group, apparently part of the Jewish super mob organized crime syndicate going official, that whole scenario. And so this Ministry of Strategic Affairs is crucial. And so Dermer being their key voice is crucial at this point because they also, a former head of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, had called for civil assassinations. So I would then question whether it is potentially the policy, maybe unspoken, but potential policy of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs to conduct what they might call civil terrorism or civil cyber warfare, you might think about it. And so Dermer and Netanyahu saying, we're not going to D.C., boom goes the bridge in Baltimore, in the port there. And so there's all these resonances, right, Greg, that we were talking about in terms of the location of all that. So maybe what we should do is just deal first with this immediate incident that just happened overnight in terms of this Dali tanker apparently having some kind of power problem, the lights going on and off, as it looks like it's almost being directed right into the key stanchion, the key support column of the bridge, that the Francis Scott Key, the symbolism is pretty intense here,
Right,
actually, when
yeah.
you think about it.
Yeah.
So maybe
Right,
let's
yeah.
deal with that. Let's deal with this first, and then we'll return to Crocus and the 322 Moscow terrorist attacks.
Sounds good. And I guess the one thing I identified with Ron Dermer is we noticed we've talked about the Netanyahu being delicate and sensitive around being critical of the administration and being critical of the Democratic Party and the elements even that have now reached the levels of officially Chuck Schumer, protector of Israel, speaking directly against Netanyahu and directly against the hardliners in Israel on the floor of the Senate. And I noticed Ron Dermer is less now that he's not in a U.S. voice of diplomacy as the ambassador. Now he's a bit more willing to not gloves off, but a bit more willing to be a little more blunt about, yeah, we don't like this move that's being made here, and we're expressing that through not coming to DC. So
Yes, and as you pointed out, Greg, that look, Dermer is the key Trump whisperer in many ways in terms of the Netanyahu Trump.
that was the way it was described in the book. Bibi Netanyahu's book is that Dermer could explain the golf analogies in terms of he could use golf analogies to describe the Middle East to Trump.
Yeah, so Dermer being put front and center here, not as just some off books official, and he's not the foreign secretary, or he's not the key diplomat, but he's the head of strategic affairs, and the significance of the U.S. Treasury Office of Foreign Asset Control shifting from during the Trump administration, where it was, as I pointed out, Sigal Mandolkar, I think her name is, really honing in on attempting to sanction obvious, I think it's very obvious that things such as the New Horizons conference are obviously involved with foreign intelligence. It's pretty obvious to me. Now, the Iranians will deny it, the Russians will deny it, but it's obvious to us from our background and understanding of someone like Dugin, Alexander Dugin, who is has been presented at these New Horizons conferences as maybe the convening foreign voice that the Iranians invited to these conferences. And by the way, it's there with some of these so-called American dissidents at surrounding the table that Dugin says that the September 11th attacks were the beginning of the rise of the multipolar world order. All right. And so what we may do is get back into the question of timing around the 3/22/24 attacks at Crocus in terms of the Russophile conference and all these key quote unquote alt media voices and major Twitter voices who are actually in Russia and are basically pushing the FSB line. Now, I heard Jackson Hinkle basically say had been meeting. He seemed to basically directly suggest he had been meeting with FSB, and they were giving him lines about how they were already raiding areas, and they had been. Apparently, there was an interception of a potential attack on a Jewish community space a few days earlier. There was this American warning 2 weeks earlier and all of that. But the timing of the Russophile conference in relationship to then having all these key voices on the ground to be projecting out. You even have someone like Patrick Henningsen, who comes out of an American, British alt media, 21st Century Wire, very anti-Zionist, but also very Russophilic. So appropriate that he's there in Moscow, live on air on RT. You have Syrian Girl on the ground there. She's pushing out the anti-Zionist, pro-Duginist, multipolar world order talking points, just coincidentally as the terrorist attack is launched. But from our background in terms of understanding, Dugin is not just a wacky philosopher. Like if there were a Benny Morris court new historian of the Russian state, they would say Dugin is just some kind of fringe nut job, sort of maybe Nat Bull, Crowleyite, interested, edgy philosopher, but that's not the case. It looks like from the background of Dugin that he is really he is a Russian military intelligence, at the very least, asset, if not just a direct operative functioning agent. He is on the ground very often in apparently assessing and helping set up some of the precursors for some of these Russian military moves, whether it's South Ossetia or whether it's the Donbass, in conjunction with people like the Russian Orthodox Christian billionaire Malofeev, and people like Igor Girkin, who proclaimed to have been leading Putin's taking of Crimea post-Maidan, and also the first really in leadership in terms of starting what I would call the Russian dirty war in the Donbass, in the eastern Ukraine, which we are now seeing the 10th, that we're now a full decade of the quote unquote special military operation. And now we are looking like this 322 attack is potentially the bridge to an actual asserted war by Putin. That's some of the language that we're seeing. But in returning to the question of like the difference of time and the approach of the U.S. government, Sigal Mandalkar taking on mainly this, things like Iranian media assets or Iranian assets in terms of the New Horizons conference and all of that, versus the Biden Treasury Office of Foreign Asset Control directly sanctioning a key Israeli military intelligence commander of a key special technology unit 81, and also the one in control of that unit on September 11th. And that unit sits right in between Unit 8200, Israeli NSA. That's where a lot of the cyber war technology emanates from. The companies and the espionage, the corporate espionage, are articulated by the Talpiot program. It sits in between there and then the black ops behind enemy lines of the Sayeret Matkal, which virtually, this entire syndicate of people that are really playing key roles post Simchat Torah terror treason plot, from the Prime Minister Netanyahu himself to Ehud Barak to Naftali Bennett to Herzl Halevi, the head of basically the general, the chief of staff of the Israeli military, and on down. And actually, it looks like even I think even tall. I keep on forgetting his name. The commander that was sanctioned of Unit 81, I believe.
Tal Luft.
Tal what?
Was it Luft?
No, that's Gal Luft, which we'll get.
I'm sorry, I'm getting names mixed up. I'm sorry.
Tal Dillian. I think it's Tal Dillian. Yeah,
that's correct. Okay. Got my names mixed up there.
And maybe it's Tal Moshe Dillian. There's lots of different names there, but I think that I saw that there was a background, even a tie-in to Sayeret Matkal, and so you'll see that Sayeret Matkal is all over the place in terms of some of these key commanding positions, and this would be as if the American government were riddled by Green Berets or Army Rangers or Delta units or Navy SEALs, and basically in all the key positions, they were the only ones on television around the world. They were in the key ones celebrating something like September 11th on TV, in the newspaper, or telling us what was going to happen on TV afterwards. So this is, I think, an indicator of Israeli black operations being at the core of state craft in terms of Israel. And so then having Dermer be the one saying, yeah, we're not coming to D.C., boom goes the bridge, I think is crucial. And so just a little bit of the forensics of why I believe. Now, obviously, I'm not approaching this like a journalist, like a responsible journalist would approach this, where you get all of your ducks in the row in terms of the who, what, when, where, why, how, all of the facts, multiple sources that can then be proven that there is some kind of cyber attack, some kind of potential terrorism going on here before you even suggest it. No, I'm coming from this in terms of a public interest analyst. And so I'm putting forth a hypothesis that makes sense to me in terms of what we actually see from the forensics. That includes the ship apparently called in a concern, maybe not a full half hour, but many minutes before it crashed, and that was part of why the local authorities were able to shut down some traffic onto the bridge. And so at this point, it looks like it was mainly a group of municipal workers who were filling in potholes who were on the bridge at the time who are still missing. Now, so there are no confirmed dead yet from the bridge, and 2 people have been found in the water and rescued. And so there's still 6 missing people, and I believe they are all from the municipal working group there. And so what you see on the film of it, the video of it, is you see the all of the lights on board this ship, the Dali, which is being run by the Synergy Marine Group as part of the larger Maersk shipping global shipping syndicate. It's just turning on and off, and right before, it looks to me like it's almost directly guided towards a very specific post. And so then there's people saying that's not the way that shipping works. Everything is analog. Everything, including the power systems and the navigation and the direct command of the control of direction of the ship, is run by the pilots. By human pilots. But in the background of this company, the Synergy Marine Group, is this guy named Captain Rajesh Uni, Indian national, who has been involved, and I'll just read from the ICSshipping.org, International Chamber of Shipping, Shaping the Future of Shipping biography of him. Captain Rajesh Uni, founder and CEO of Synergy Group, quote, driven by a firm conviction that shipping must rapidly evolve from analog to digital, Captain Uni is joint CEO of Alpha Ori Technologies. That's ORI. AOT, Alpha Ori Technologies, which he founded in 2017. Now, I'll point out that I think it was in 2017 that there actually was an example. I think it was like maybe a live fly hacker kind of thing, like where hackers have shown that you can take command of vehicles, where you can take command of voting systems. That it was already shown in 2017 that they took command of a ship's navigation system for something like 10, 11 hours. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this Captain Rajesh Uni biography here. So, driven by a firm conviction that shipping must rapidly evolve from analog to digital, Captain Uni is joint CEO of Alpha Ori Technologies, AOT, which he founded in 2017. He recently established AOT's Center of Innovation in Singapore, which can remotely monitor, diagnose, and control most operational aspects of digital vessels using AOT's patented software, SmartShip. Where have we heard all of this before? This has now received Class N-Key approval, and installation has been completed on more than 100 ships with another 150 vessels in process. Okay, education is Captain Uni's passion. He's a Class 1 Master Mariner, graduate from Mumbai's LBS College of Advanced Maritime Studies and Research, and has completed the Advanced Management program at Harvard Business School. Now, we'll link to all of this. People can go look at some of the other backgrounds here. But the question of Hong Kong, Singapore, technology, Internet of Things, analog to digital in terms of shipping, I think suggests, I'm beginning to think of like some kind of Israel to India, to Southeast Asia, and everyone knows about Singapore and Hong Kong in terms of heavy Chinese influence. I'm beginning to think of some kind of Chinese-Israeli operation similar to what we now know about the 2000 spring operation exposed in Seeds of Fire by Gordon Thomas, that was apparently directly out of the highest levels of U.S. intelligence reporting on that by a Chinese defector, that Chinese and Israeli intelligence had been working closely together on certain things such as cyber, surveillance, even ethno-specific bioweapons that hooked in to Israel's relationship to Project Coast down in apartheid South Africa, where it's been said that Israel took over the South African apartheid government's bioweapons programs. That goes into Nes Ziona, which is the Israeli Institute of Biological Research, which is a very secret place on the outskirts, I think, of Tel Aviv. And so there, I am beginning, and so basically, I'll finish the thread there. That this reminds me of what was disclosed, that the Chinese and Israelis, I think, apparently piggybacking on this longer term Israeli operation of enhanced promise software that was then trucked and bartered via Rafi Eitan, key long term Mossad officer, and then by his conduit through Robert Maxwell's global intelligence contacts into dozens of governments all around the world, including a very red line crossing high level contact that Maxwell had with the Chinese government in relation to enhanced promise, where it was reported that Maxwell had disclosed something that he shouldn't have, which was that the Israelis had this trap door, this Trojan horse programmed into it, into enhanced promise that could then be a mirror back to Israeli intelligence of any government in the world in terms of what they were looking at or using the enhanced promise software for, whether it was using it to target and liquidate maybe up to 20,000 political dissidents under the Guatemalan military dictatorship, or whether it was then eventually, Canada's usage of the software for who knows what, or China's usage of the software, or the then Soviet Union's usage of the software. And the Chinese showed interest to Robert Maxwell of, can this be used to break the security barrier of Los Alamos Laboratory, which is ultimately then maybe more than, almost a decade and a half later, where a combination, what you might call in the Israeli context, Hugint, a combination of signals intelligence and human intelligence operations such as we very much are confirmed about, such as the Stuxnet virus, and the installation of that in the Iranian nuclear program was a combination of signals intelligence warfare and human intelligence operations. That the Chinese and Israelis, to me, it looks like under cover of this controlled fire that was set in the woodlands around Los Alamos. Remember this whole history there, right? Oppenheimer and the nuke and all of that kind of stuff there. That the Chinese and the Israelis made their way into the laboratory there at Los Alamos under the cover of this fire, it looks like to me, and were able to access and very likely exfiltrate these key nuclear secret drives that were managed by the Department of Energy's Nuclear Emergency Security Team, NEST, that was then just a year and a half later out of the country for the big event of September 11th for the first time in 3 years under Operation Jackal Cave, where they were then in this European theater, I believe with NATO, in a drill of undoing a terrorist nuclear device, while I would say then boom goes ground zero at the very least. And so there's that whole background there. So, the context here is if Dermer and Netanyahu are really angry with the Biden administration for the combination of sanctioning their Israeli military intelligence commander of Unit 81 on September 11th, and also the producer of major other cyber weapons, such as, the cyber weapons that are parallel to what we know of Israeli cyber weapons, such as NSO, which has been reported to have been used against journalists, activists, including potentially targeting Khashoggi, including targeting people like Jeff Bezos, potentially. But also NSO was used in terms of this question of civil assassination in the Ministry of Strategic Affairs in attacking like Berkeley professors who were Palestinians and Palestinian solidarity activists, in targeting them for civil assassination and flyering campaigns in their neighborhood even. So, and then the Chinese are very angry about this TikTok bill. And so there's a combination of things going on here. Now, I'm not I wouldn't say there's enough evidence to really say for sure that there's some kind of Israeli, Indian, Singaporean, Chinese axis behind this apparent cyber attack. I would say there's probably much more historical and direct intent and motive pointing directly at Netanyahu. But I think the timing is very interesting, and this network here that goes into the heart of the conjunction of Chinese and Israeli cyber power, which is through Southeast Asia and then in an arc up into China. And one last thing I'll point out, that even if you think about September 11th, these key networks, such as Shaul Eisenberg, key player in the run-up to September 11th, even in terms of the attempted first run that we talked about a little bit before, where you had Avraham Ben Dor, and Avi Peter something, I can't remember the other guy's name, tried to take over the Port Authority security at the World Trade Center in the late 80s, and then get found out and then ultimately regroup. A lot of this is the umbrella architecture of a lot of the companies and operatives that are involved are under the architecture of someone like Shaul Eisenberg, who's called basically, who, I think the way that the phrase that was out of Israeli circles was, is Shaul Eisenberg Mossad, or is Mossad Shaul Eisenberg? And Shaul Eisenberg is basically the guy who establishes Israeli not only intelligence, but real diplomatic, statecraft, technological, financial, ultimately helped set up that key visit of the high-level Israeli military intelligence officials to China in, I think, 1979. And he's the key Israeli operative in the entire Asian sphere, especially around Japan and China. So this
Jeremy,
is, yeah, go for it.
Oh, you brought up something very interesting here. And I was just thinking about this, that maybe this is something to look at for more information on. But this 1979 Israel-China Shaul Eisenberg is also right at the time, I believe, that the U.S. officially established diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. So I don't know if there's an interconnector there, or if that's timeline-wise significant in terms of maybe some operations that took place in the preceding years that followed. But I just wanted to mention that.
No, that is crucial. And the 79 is this, obviously it's this one of these key years that we look at. There's so much going on there, and we will have to return to it actually, because it then leads into these key years of the 80s, which is where Enhanced Promise ultimately then gets smuggled out of the Bill and Nancy Hamilton's hands via very specific Reagan-connected both officials and basically operatives, including Earl Bryan and Ed Meese and others, who are all then connected back into what I would call the California super mob, and people like the Lou Wasserman point of connection to the longer-term Jewish super mob and the Lansky Syndicate, that really were the ones who helped elevate everyone from Richard Nixon. Mickey Cohen always talked about he couldn't believe that Nixon was the president. I remember back in 47 when we helped launch his political career. He was such a little locally kind of guy. I can't imagine he's president. I think that's what Mickey Cohen said about him. And then on through up into the 80s in terms of Reagan, where it was a Wasserman, it was an MCA, it was a super mob operation to help install Reagan into the White House. And then these key Reagan people were the ones back from California. For example, Earl Bryan, at the epicenter of this Enhanced Promise software scenario, was, I think, the health minister, the California health minister under Reagan. Ed Meese was the attorney general under Reagan, and these guys were key to this key moment that I believe is crucial to the sealing of the deal between this, at least like probably a 40-year, really intense relationship between Israeli intelligence and Chinese intelligence that is highly covert in terms of, at the very least, the public's knowledge. But even in terms of, I think, the American security state, the level of need to know around that kind of thing. Like, I wonder how many people actually know this story that's printed in Seeds of Fire by Gordon Thomas. It's the only place I can find that I've seen anything suggesting this happened. But a lot of the pieces fit together. And Thomas had sources across many countries and many intelligence services. And to me, he looks like he was an honest broker in terms of an independent journalist who had contact, and he basically would just allow the intelligence services to tell him their take on things, but would not guarantee that he was going to publish their story. He would publish his story. And so I imagine these kinds of long-term Chinese and Israeli intelligence operations that are very human intelligence and signals intelligence or cyber intelligence are long running, and we barely even scratch the surface of it. And I would just finish up by saying that I think that this spring of 2000 operation against the Los Alamos laboratory and the Department of Energy's nuclear bomb squad is highly significant and highly suggestive, especially when combined with other aspects of what are in Seeds of Fire that include Chinese intelligence contacts with what I would call the legend part of the September 11th operations. That includes Bin Laden, the Taliban, Afghanistan, Eurasia, Mujahideen, and all of that, including that on September 11th, the highest level Chinese contingent of officers visited the Taliban to deliver Huawei and ZTE cellular technology, and then also things like anti-aircraft and communications warfare technology to the Taliban. So when you combine all of this together, a lot of people do not want to deal with it. But as we pointed out, even before we knew any of the details of all of this, there's a part of the global war on terror as a rubric, as a geopolitical mechanism, as a front for deeper geopolitics, where at the very least, certain elements in the United States obviously were not only had to be in the know, but were involved in some way, in a similar kind of way that they were involved in the assassinations of the 60s, and then definitely on September 11th, Israel. I continue to see Israeli military intelligence, Netanyahu specifically. I think he's the most credibly accused mastermind of 9/11 that I can muster at this point. Now, there were others involved, but I believe that he was very likely very much in the know. He's Sire at Matkal, black ops behind enemy lines. Now the mask has come off in terms of, it's becoming more public discourse that the U.S.-Israel special relationship is not strategic for the United States. Netanyahu, the adversary, Israel, the motherlode of albatrosses around geopolitical necks is what is now Netanyahu and Dermer are signaling, I'd say.
Yeah, and I would say that we've identified the pre and post 10/7 as far as the increased animus, the increased battle that was taking place. I think that was becoming more and more publicly visible in the months and years leading up to October 7th. I would say that definitely accelerated post installation of Donald Trump, as we talk about all the time, and 11/9 and the rise of this destabilizing MAGA movement and everything that comes with it, both domestically and geopolitically here in the West. And then the post 10/7, there was the attempt to bear hug Netanyahu, as it was described by Biden, and try to balance around what was going on and maintain support for the post, the attempts to deal with the elements who did 10/7 according to the official narrative and all this Hamas and everything and the terrorists. But then the I think traditional diplomatic, traditional governmental function elements or attempts to handle the situations, a number of situations, which includes the traditional aid package to Israel, includes giving aid to Ukraine, and then, of course, the way to try to handle the burgeoning border situation here in the U.S. At the southern border in an actual serious politically viable manner was pretty much detonated by the Trump interests, as far as within the Republican Party, who actively worked to obstruct the attempt to. I think as a result of this, you have increased efforts at. There's been numerous escalating moves made by maybe what you call both sides of this, whereas this is a blow up of the efforts to deal with things diplomatically, but also puts the Biden administration in a tough situation as far as Israel goes, because then for seen as a victory, I think, in a lot of ways, for people who don't just see the traditional special relationship military aid to Israel as being the be all end all of what the U.S. Of what the U.S.'s support for Israel should be. And then the response to this, I feel like partially a response to this might have been the combination of the sanctioning, as you were talking about, of Unit 81, and then also of the Schumer moment, of where it goes from just like it goes from the progressive squad members, people of color in Congress in the Democratic Party, directly criticizing the post 10/7 murder taking place and slaughter taking place, to Schumer, much less bluntly, but also very significant, as we talked about, manner, making that same condemnation. And then you've got this, and you've got the UN moves, and then now we're not coming to DC to meet with Biden. And then, as you said, boom goes the bridge, and whether or not that's actually what's taking place here might remain to be seen. But there is definitely, I noticed a series of escalatory moves, maybe kind of a game of chicken taking place here between both sides of with regards to the Israeli element of things. And then this TikTok thing is very controversial, where I think the narrative around TikTok is a mess all over the place, but there is an element that's very, very, I think, frustrated with efforts to try and at the very least limit its usage, and then also outright ban it. So there's a few things I think maybe coming to head here. And I don't know if you want to comment on that before I figure into talk a little bit about the I think domestic response to the events on March 22nd.
I think you're correct about the escalation, like including like the AIPAC has sharpened its attack on the sort of squad and squad affiliate Congress people, obviously. And a lot has been made of the Jonathan Greenblatt recording that we have a TikTok problem. To basically associate, and I think this is true. I think there's a large driver of the rapidity of action in relationship to the TikTok question that's been bubbling for a long time, that does have a lot to do with the Israel lobby's difficulty with maintaining message control on TikTok. But I don't think it's as simple as that, because Greenblatt, what he actually said is we have a generational problem. And then he said, including in this generational problem, is that most of the young people are not on Facebook, where we've had, we were the earliest in terms of shaping the narrative and speech policing on Facebook in many ways. Obviously, Palestinians were really the first groups who were censored on Facebook and taken down on Facebook, and a lot of that came out of the ADL network. They have offices in many ways and that work directly in or with these social media companies. But in more general terms, he was basically saying the younger generation, the Generation Z folks, they're really on TikTok more. And so it was talking about a generational problem that was really the thing that he was most existentially scared of. And so I think there was a combination of things going on here in terms of the TikTok thing. There's aspects of the Israelis that really wanted especially the Israel lobby, that wanted to shut it down, definitely TikTok. But there was these other, more even cultural, but also national security questions operations in terms of data and narrative warfare that are obviously also involved with TikTok that are related to Chinese information operations and data warfare and data collection, espionage kinds of operations. So it's interesting that you might see China and Israel, at least the deep states or the security states, being on potentially opposite sides of the TikTok question in certain ways. But I think when the rubber meets the road and some of these deep operations, such as September 11th, that there is a certain amount of long-term coordination
Hmm.
that they're willing to work together. Now, it could be that if this were to have been like the first major, maybe like real, of major renown cyber terrorist attack via a ship, then it may have just been Israeli intelligence access. And obviously, the enhanced promise software background suggests that Israel has been setting up backdoor access via its intelligence relationships with all of these different countries for many decades. And so it could be that they just had access via some of these very Chinese networks and these Southeast Asian networks. And but the one thing I just wanted to finish up is that in terms of September 11th, what we'd always noticed was that it couldn't have. It was obviously, U.S. and Israeli elements were not only the dogs that didn't bark, but the dogs that bit, potentially, who involved in September 11th. But the bigger question of the multipolar world order and at the very least, the dogs that didn't bark in terms of Beijing and Moscow, and, in terms of Russian and Chinese interest in the war on terror. And so that's why, when we finally get to the 322 scenario, that we have to look at the real deeper background of the war on terror as, the Moscow apartment bombings that helped launch Putin's big public political career and then further escalate his second Chechen war in a massive way, while escalating domestic police state operations, while celebrating his popularity amongst the domestic Russian population, is 1999 Moscow bombings, and then throw in 2002 the whole question of the theater, right? The theater terrorist attack that has very suspicious aspects that we've covered in previous episodes. And you begin to see, China and Russia may not even have just been dogs that didn't bark in terms of the event that launched the rise of the multipolar world order, as Dugan told the New Horizons conference, but they may have also been parts of the dogs that bit.
Yeah, I think that's very plausible. And I go back to with the member of the post September 11th, right after September 11th, just how supportive Putin was of the immediate war on terror effort right after September 11th. The post George W. Bush's quote of "I looked in his eyes and I saw his soul" of Putin opening up airspaces to go into Afghanistan and fight the Taliban, and also obviously and then China stepped up its own security measures against its problematic elements of the population, i.e. the Uyghur Muslim element of the population, among others, post September 11th as well. So definitely in the case of, there's direct Russia support for the terror effort immediately after, quote unquote. And then at the very least, I think there was a benefiting of, from a China angle, it appears, of being able to increase its own ability to deal with the elements of the population that were seen as problematic there.
Yes, and part of that coordinate, like the beyond the diplomatic embrace, of Putin and Bush, they logistically just really definitely just directly aided the United States in going into Afghanistan, which, when you think about going back to the history of 1979, where on the very same day, Valentine's Day, you have two Valentine's Day massacres in 1979. You have one where the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, Dubs, was killed after having been kidnapped. Still lots of questions about who all was involved in the entire operation, including the nature of the ultimate killing of Dubs. But it really was a crucial moment in terms of the launching of the larger scale operation that then becomes, Mujahideen and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and the Americans and Israelis working with Pakistanis and Saudis and Yemenis and the Bin Laden network to, give the Russians or the Soviets their Vietnam War. And so the resonance post 9/11 of like where Putin's being like, we're right behind you, Bush comrade. Like, sure, you want to use our former Soviet republic bases to help launch your return to Afghanistan, where you set us up to for the Soviet Empire to collapse. Sure, we'll help you. We'll help you like right into your ditch.
There you go. And it's interesting that in terms of the legends, you mentioned like the different parties potentially involved with what took place with the rise of Mujahideen, and then of course that becomes the Bin Laden network and all of this. And in the legends, in terms of narrative legends, Zbigniew Brzezinski kind of becomes maybe the LBJ did it of that narrative. Like, oh, it was Brzezinski and the American deep state doing this, when in reality there was much more, appears definitely much more involved with this than just that. But then also this is also part of the mess that Jimmy Carter got sent from a foreign policy perspective that ultimately was used to weaken and ultimately defeat him by the Wasserman mob guy Ronald Reagan in 1980. So I just want to throw that in there, that it's way deeper than just the legend, which is that it's Brzezinski, which then ultimately just goes with like the American intelligence agencies and all this. There's, I think, a much deeper regard to that, but certainly there was definitely help to weaken Carter, which I think multiple foreign interests saw a vested interest in.
And by the way, the other Valentine's Day massacre of 1979 that I forgot to then include was then the beginning of the sort of proto Iran hostage crisis. It was the first attack on the U.S. embassy was launched there, and then there is an entire American, very George H.W. Bush CIA cowboy syndicate, including Richard Helms, key player in all of that, in terms of the really like the staging of the entirety of not only the Iran hostage crisis, and many people on quote unquote all sides do not want to deal with this, but actually the selection of Khomeini as the victor of the Iranian Revolution. And so we're going to have to get into that aspect of it. And obviously that big incident was maybe the first big 444 days on television of the Iran hostage crisis, terrorism, very first big, really big and repetitive drilling into especially the American televised psyche of the war on terror and how it's related to the Muslims, and this is related to the Iranians and all of that. But when you really look into it, there's really a strong aspect of the groups that actually helped set up Carter to be replaced by not only Reagan, but George H.W. Bush, right?
Iran, yes, indeed. And then all of what we've been talking about, like with the neocon split within, I think, the Reagan-Bush administration, even the Bush elements against some of these other elements. But then also something I think we're going to explore more going forward of like intergenerational binding ties between various events and these networks that ultimately I think end up finding themselves at odds. Like, for example, the Bush gang and the Israeli hardline interests. So we'll dig more into that going forward. But definitely, it's I think it's significant. And the Iran hostage crisis was broadcasted every night to the American people via Nightline with Ted Koppel, which was a pretty revolutionary concept at the time. And then also this was the same time period when CNN was launched in the beginning of the permanent 24-hour cable news cycle, which then by the time of the Persian Gulf War in 1991 was so preeminently definitive in the way of how information was processed and transmitted. So yeah, it was definitely an integral event, I think, for the in terms of modern news media as well. And Jeremy, I think we're going to begin wrapping up here. I wanted to talk a little bit about unless you want to go a little longer, but than what we're talking about here. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what I saw with the particular response as far as the domestic element, as far as within American discourse of the March 22nd Moscow attacks. I'm also going to interconnect this back in with the Israel-Gaza war post 10/7, which I had noticed to you, Jeremy. I'd mentioned the response from somebody who I've been looking at a little closer, like in terms of the Republican Party post 11/9, post Trump, Marco Rubio, and his response on ABC's This Week on Sunday morning about basically that this is. Weakness causes American instability around the globe, and then also this is going to happen if we don't take care of our border. And so there's an emphasis on the domestic terror threat as a result of this event that we identified as being a key part of the 2016 discourse, which is the events that took place, whether it was international in France in November of 2015, or whether it was domestic in terms of San Bernardino, California, or the Orlando nightclub event, and the emphasis on terrorism and civilizational clash that was key to the geopolitical upheaval that took place in the Western world with the Brexit ruling and Brexit vote, and then Trump's victory and everything, and so many other things that have happened. We're seeing that play out now, whereas I see two figures in two different ways are pushing the terror threat of this, which also plays into the culture war threat of this as it relates to the immigration and multicultural societies and all of this. It plays into a lot of angles, but the Rubio response of the response of his ilk, and I didn't see Lindsey Graham, but I'm sure he's probably having a similar response of the border threat. The border threat. We have to take care of our border, or else things like this are going to happen here, and it's going to be ISIS or whatever is taking responsibility for it, and they're going to attack us here if we don't take care of the borders because of Biden's disservice to the country, that he's not taking care of it, and we need Trump back to take care of these things. And he was directly asked about hang Mike Pence, by the way. Rubio was, and his response was to ignore that and talk about all the great things that Trump was doing to keep America strong, as opposed to the weak Biden administration. But then you also have another character in the form of Alex Jones, who recently came out very critical of the war effort in Gaza and of the killing of civilians. It's obviously becoming harder and harder to ignore in so many areas, obviously including in American diplomatic circles, as we've seen play out now that the immediate aftermath of 10/7 is worn off in terms of the being supportive of the military reaction and all of that, of Alex Jones's condemnation of the civilian death toll in Gaza and the videos that are coming out and all this. It's all framed, though, when you listen a little closer, it's all framed in, they're going to bring this over here, and they're going to bring these angry Muslims over here to do it to us. We have to protect our borders and keep these immigrants out of here, these people who live in that are not these third worlders out of our country. So you're seeing through both. I noticed this through both the response to the Moscow event, but then also even as it relates to Israel, Gaza. And I've noticed this for a while with some of these. We noticed the initial, I think, a bit of a split between what we identified maybe as the Ben Shapiro camp that was immediately concerned with U.S. With Israel. We have to stand with Israel in terms of the Israeli response. But then also somebody like Tucker Carlson in another camp of like, why do we care so much about Israel? Let's worry about our own borders. But it still ends up in this. It still ends up with a very similar type of outcome ultimately, where the concern is ultimately what the threat of the people who don't look like you in the case of, or who aren't like you. In the case of Israel, these Palestinians, these terrorists are seen as threatening the only democracy in the Middle East and all that horse nonsense, whatever. And then the whole the idea of, well, we're going to import this terror here, and we need to seal our borders and protect ourselves so that they don't come here and do this to us. So ultimately, it all just tends to stoke the fear of what they're going to come over here and do. If they're doing it in Israel, they're going to do it here, or we have to support Israel to keep it from happening here and all of this. And now we're seeing through the, I think through the response from a domestic portions of the domestic response to the March 22nd event in Russia, and also through the further response to 10/7, is that it's shaped in the terror threat, where it's the little more sanitized. We have to take care of our borders so that what happens in Moscow doesn't happen here. To the much more, I think, naked nastiness of Alex Jones. These people are going to come over here and attack us because they blame us for it, and so ultimately, what is seen as like a expression of solidarity or something ultimately turns into a no, I'm against this because they're going to flood America with these people and they're going to do it to us here. So I've noticed that on both fronts of responses, as far as the some of the current rhetoric regarding the situation, the Israel-Gaza war, and then also the Moscow attacks.
You're laying out a piece of the narrative warfare line here, actually, I think, Greg, that actually helps suggest some of the reasoning and MO even behind the Crocus attack on March 22nd, because the maybe the other big, more recent previous 322 attack was the 2016 Brussels bombings that was also, said to have been done by ISIS, and the same ISIS cell, the same ISIS group that had done the previous falls, the Bataclan Theater attack, I believe. And so then the next spring, you have on March 22nd, the coordinated terrorist attack that strikes at the heart of the European Union, right? And as we've talked about a lot, the terror war and the culture war are these twin pillars of the 21st century larger narrative warfare against we the people more globally, but also nationally. In terms of the American population. And we always noticed that there was these two very obvious elements that were very interested in destabilizing the European Union. One of them was the Kremlin. The other one was spoken by Israeli Ambassador Michael Oren, who very openly basically said, yeah, Israel is against the European Union at this point. And so when you see, I think, the line of the idea of the combination of the migrants and the Muslims, right, combined into ISIS striking at the core of your civil society, right, and the March 22nd, 2016 attack in Brussels was, suicide bombers are said to have detonated bombs at the airport and on the train, right? And now you have this Russian theater operation. There's a lot of theater operations in the Russian sphere, and that seems to be part of it. Even if you think about going back to like Vladislav Surkov, right, the Putin's former Gray Cardinal, the modern proponent of political theater warfare craft, right? Hypernormalization and all of that. He comes directly out of the theater. So the theater of war, the war of theater, the war in theaters. And so I think that what you're describing is potentially a key component of the narrative warfare line of these kinds of attacks, and these apparently coordinated, it looks like to me, American domestic quote unquote responses by elements, including inside of the government, but also quote unquote alt media and Alex Jones and all of this kind of thing. So I think you're really onto something, and so I think what we need to look for in terms of the Crocus attacks, the recent Russian attacks, is which part of the potential line of accusation in terms of who did this, or the cui bono, and who actually all did this, right? We've already seen like the United States, who had offered these warnings. It's not clear whether the Russian government received them or it was directly offered by the U.S. Embassy or not, or intelligence services or not. But it was public. It was made public that there was a general threat that might involve things like public places that might include malls or theaters. and very ISIS. Remember, this is said to be ISIS-K connected, which is in Afghanistan, right? Afghani ISIS, and just going back to post September 11th, there were these aspects of the war on terror that were seen as very legitimate in terms of the American interests, the Chinese interests, in terms of even their apparent meeting with the Taliban officials on September 11th in terms of a diplomatic exchange and military and communications aid from the Chinese to the Taliban was said to have been in exchange for controlling the Afghani-sourced, Taliban-sourced terrorism into Chinese provinces, right? And the Russians, of course, in terms of Chechnya and all that. So this is a long-running aspect here, and it's very obvious. It's similar in terms of Israel and its security services, all kinds of units that are designed to infiltrate behind their local enemy lines, is the way they see it, whether it's into West Bank Palestine or Gaza Palestine, Hamas, all these kinds of organizations that are both inside of Shin Bet, the domestic security services in Israel, or their military intelligence organizations that are designed to infiltrate. It's well known that, like, the Russians, the FSB and the GRU have units that are well infiltrated into many of these kinds of Islamic terrorist groups, including ISIS, and very often running them and having agents in place. And so one thing I think we should look for, and this, I guess I'll finish up for this episode on this, is look which author of the attacks is emphasized by the Kremlin most intensely. And it's obvious that that even in Putin's early statements, he pointed towards that the escaping terrorist attackers had a window open for them at the Ukrainian border. There looks to be a Ukrainian interface. There are others who are directly pointing the finger at the CIA and NATO that are said to have been the masterminds. This is basically, this is the Gladio. If NATO is expanding post the Cold War, then the Gladio program is also expanding alongside it. And this is basically the NATO CIA Gladio false flag terrorism into the heart of the Russian society, or something like that. And so by the way, it looks like that the Russians have already escalated very specific attacks against, I think, Ukrainian intelligence buildings and military intelligence buildings. So it's obvious that the Ukrainians did this with, the Americans and NATO backing of this is obviously still at play. But the ISIS-K line seems to still be what's being put front and center. And so I would imagine that you will see a coordination in a similar kind of way that I see potential Israeli and Chinese motive behind what looks to me like a cyber shipping attack, or a civil. We can call it a civil, Mr. Dermer. We'll call it a civil cyber terrorist attack via shipping components or something like that. That I think we're looking for something like an escalation versus the kind of elements that will be ascribed to be either ISIS themselves or in the vein of ISIS, aka Hamas, that we're going to see Putin and Netanyahu seize this moment for their escalation. Obviously, the question of Israel and Rafah is a key one right now, and it's already, there's aspects of their, they're pushing, and the question of the northern border and Hezbollah, there was an attack way up into Lebanon against the Hezbollah targets in the recent week. And so I think we want to look to these kinds of scenarios. And then finally, I'll just say that in terms of understanding who actually did this and why, you want to begin to actually look at certain forensics. So you will see the question of the security stand down, the fire system stand down at the Crocus building there. You will see, looks like a bunch of, at least a handful of different blue plainclothes apparent security operatives, very likely Russian security operatives in place in the theater. They don't seem to be concerned. They seem to be coordinating. Now, it could be said that they're just there because they're watching, they're trying to help out. However, it looks like there's some aspect of like the locking of the door. Remember, this is similar to September 11th in the World Trade Center. The doors were locked. People couldn't escape. They were trapped in the building, and then the buildings go boom. And so you begin to see a whole aspect of this. There was the delay, similar to October 7th, where there's that was a multi-hour delay of so-called security response that allowed the Simchat Torah terror treason plot to escalate. And then you add in the mass Hannibal directive and all of that. And you see similar kinds of things happening here. You have the stand down of security systems. How did these guys get in? Moscow is heavily surveilled, a lot of strong security systems. This is a fairly newly renovated building. The fire systems are strong. And what you really see is like probably a security stand down for at least an hour. There's multiple FSB units and all kinds of Spetsnaz units located in the general vicinity that, there should be able to respond in under an hour. You see things like communications being taken down at the time of the attack, so that either that signals that security forces were there and responding, or that someone who was involved with the attack had the power to jam signals, communications, and all of that. So, and then the final piece of forensics there, obviously, is the building being lit on fire in a highly effective and fast way, and the roof very quickly collapses, and it's this massive building on fire scene. And so you might want to look at things like Spetsnaz, Russian special forces type white phosphorus grenades that ISIS probably didn't have, especially these kind of ISIS guys who basically said that they were contracted for, about something like $5,000 on Telegram by people that they didn't know to do this. And they look scared. This is out of the ordinary of an ISIS attack in terms of willingness to see it all the way through, of potential suicide, and all that kind of thing. Now, the 2016, 2015 ISIS attacks there was evasion, and they escaped in certain ways, and then the cell allegedly regrouped to attack again on 3/22. But these are very suspicious kinds of indicators here. And so I'll just finish up by saying, basically, to me, on the surface, as similarly that the ship into the bridge go boom kind of operation looks on the surface to me like some kind of, special operations cyber attack, a man in the middle cyber attack, in terms of the energy, the power systems on the ship and the navigation systems on the ship, by an element that I believe the very likely highest MO is somewhere in the axis between Israel and China, but more heavily weighted towards Israel. Here, I think you see a combination of the 1999 Moscow bombings and then the 2002 Moscow theater hostage crisis. A little bit toned down, a little bit more controlled, but still over 100 casualties and a major building on fire. And you'll probably then see if this is actually some kind of, very likely if this is an inside job, let's say, in terms of some component, whether it's, signed off on by Putin, the former head of the FSB, or whether this is some kind of rogue unit, remember, there's this whole arch-right hyper-nationalist element, includes Igor Girkin, who was Putin's man on the ground in Crimea and Eastern Donbass, alongside people like Alexander Dugin, and that whole scenario there, that they are actually pushing the hyper-nationalists, the right-wing nationalists in Russia, are pushing very similar kinds of phraseology that you're talking about being pushed by similar forces in the United States, who very often tend to be also what we might call Russophilic, where this is a problem of outsiders. This is a problem of Muslim Islamification, and all of that. And so there could be some kind of like a extremist internal cell that's forcing Putin's hand, or even potentially attempting to weaken Putin's hand by showing him to be weak on security, while also escalating the war, because the Gherkin types have their main criticism of Putin, even the type of criticism that lands them in jail, or apparently, or if you're a Wagner head, like Prigozhin, potentially by being shot down after an attempted coup. Now, there's more to that story, I think, potentially, but I don't know. We'll leave that there for now. These elements have often, there's certain elements involved in either Wagner or the Igor Gherkin set where they are pushing Putin to actually stop with this fancy special military operation language. Let's go kill as many Ukrainians and take on the entire country as possible, right? Remember Dugin, kill, kill, kill. Ukrainian, in the subhumanizing language that Putin in many ways, in a certain way, has used paleo-neocon language to avoid totally dehumanizing the quote-unquote Ukrainian Nazi enemy, even though even the Nazi language is used in a way that's meant to dehumanize the totality of the Ukrainian people and the state. So I think that it could be any of these things, but to me, the parameters are there, that this is a combination of the 1999 Moscow bombings and the Moscow theater hostage crisis of 2002. This was an FSB GRU type Kremlin operation.
And I think the response to this could very well be could very well be used to serve two masters, so to speak, in that both the ISIS narrative and the Ukrainians, with the help of, or with the West, or coordinated or whatever, is that it can target both. It could both figure into a management of savagery as it relates to the mother and father of ISIS being the Clinton-Obama administration, or also the management of savagery of the Ukrainian Nazis, as they call them, and that this could be like the event to maybe is this the bridge too far to where now both of them have really got to crush both of them? I don't know, but it's interesting that you're identifying this desire by some of these forces to see an increased way in which the quote-unquote special military operation is carried out and conducted, and that'll be something to look forward to going forward. But I could see not just through the conventional narrative domestically of this is going to happen here if we don't control it, and the weak administration needs to be replaced by the strong administration that will protect us in the ways that the weak ones won't do it, because either by dereliction of duty or by intent, and also the serving two masters and two birds with one stone of both the management of the ISIS savagery, of the Islamic terrorism via Max Blumenthal, and I guess also the management that would be seen in these circles of the Ukro-Nazi savagery. So I think that both of those could be served by at least the narratives and responses in the aftermath to this.
You're right, and they are being served, and then in the West, in terms of the alt anti-Zog EU kind of West, you will still have like the counter, the sort of flip side of the Euchre Nazi coin is Zelensky, the Jewish global homo leader of the corrupt world. So that can be factored in there together as a dirty package deal. And I think you're correct. And I just want to finish up by saying that it was Tajikistan and Uzbekistan were the former Soviet republics that Putin made accessible and almost encouraged the United States to launch its global war on terror before it was even litigated in terms of, or even a white paper fulfilling NATO Article 5 in terms of whether the 9/11 attacks actually fully came from outside the country or from another state actor or with other state actor approval. And Putin was already, let's do it. And remember, like these two October 7th moments are Putin's birthday. Not only do you have the obviously long-time facilitated Netanyahu Hamas conjunction operation of whether you call it Al-Aqsa flood or if you call it the Simchat Torah terror treason plot from the Netanyahu side, that's on Putin's birthday. But you also have George W. Bush announcing the kinetic launch of the global war on terror post 9/11 on October 7th, 2001. By the way, the plans for Afghanistan, the military plans for Afghanistan were on the, I believe they were on Bush's desk days before September 11th. Okay. This is an area where when I confronted Scott Ritter, more than 15 years ago, he was very weaselly, very touchy. He was also very touchy about the question of Israel and the neocons in terms of war on terror policy and Israeli intelligence. Very squirrely. And but I believe that this is well substantiated. This was planned in advance by certain elements, and then the final thing that I would look for in terms of questions of a Russian inside job is look for power politics domestically. So including things like this could be used as a grab against the Agalarovs, even a grab of their assets. It looks like even the elder Agalarov has already left the country, I think. So you'll see that. You'll also see them potentially jockeying for positions of certain security state FSB positions and certain kinds of political security power coup moves in the wake of this.
Yeah. And my final point will be that I'll make this quick is that I think Zelensky has to be viewed as one of the primary faces of what I have referred to in the past as the Mecca-Mecha conspiracy, Jeremy. The talk of how Barack Obama could both simultaneously be an Islamic fundamentalist, stealth jihadist attack on America, but also this radical Marxist communist, and when the idea of fundamental Islam and those two ideas seem to be pretty incompatible with each other, you would think. But Obama served both of those at the same time with perfect coordination. Now you mentioned the degenerate Zelensky narrative of what he derisively referred to in some circles as the penis piano player, or in the more E. Michael Jones language picked up by the likes of Alex Jones more recently. In that now both Zelensky is now the using the Nazis to put Russia into war with the West and World War III with the West, but also, and the threat of nuclear war is also served through that. But then also the degenerate Zelensky is also serving the interest of the same masters who also want to flood the West with not only people who don't look like you, but also people who don't look like you who will be more than happy to cut your children's genitals off because they serve Satan or whatever. So that's a little basic and a little exaggerated, but I think people get the point I'm making.
That's the architecture, and thank you for being willing to confront it, Greg. I appreciate it.
Well, no problem.
All right, and thank you everybody out there for rocking with us, being with us, and Ramadan Mubarak to all the Muslims out there, and end the Palestinian Holocaust now. All right, until next time, Antidote, we are out.